They built an army they could never afford. When their economy crashed, they were a powerless country with a big old army and nothing to do with it. Just so you all know, 42 cents of every dollar that the federal government spends, every dollar is borrowed. 42 cents. We pay enough interest. I would say a couple things. I know we've got a bipartisan or a nonpartisan crowd here tonight, and that's good news. Because when I ran for Congress, I ran as a Republican, but I didn't have to talk about that much. I just talked about my beliefs. I just said to people, I don't care what party you are. Look at my views. You agree with me, vote for me. You don't agree with me, vote for the other person. That was pretty effective. Because I found that when you get past the party thing and you just talk about conservative beliefs, you can get a lot of people looking at you in a different way. And they realize that most of us are conservatives. Some of you may not want to admit it. I can't point Bruce out as a conservative. But I know he is. I've looked into his heart. I know. You know, I grew up in this town as a Democrat. I worked for Senator Bill Friendly Henley. You may remember him. Oh, I did. And I've made peace with Mike Conner since then. We're good buddies. And I interned for Dale Bumpers, Senator Dale Bumpers in the early 90s. I just wanted to intern. I was going to take whoever let me go up there to Washington. And so I grew up, Sid McMahon's my cousin. Y'all heard of him? Probably. Columbia County, Democrat. So, you know, what I want to talk about tonight is, the good thing is it's really not a partisan issue, it's an American issue. And I can tell y'all, Democrat and Republican, we have a big, big challenge, folks. If I can get serious for a little bit, we have a big problem on our hands. And it is a moral problem, and you probably know it as a fiscal problem, financial problem. I'm talking about our debt. We have, for a long time, been living beyond our means as a country. We've been spending money that we did not have. And a country is just like your home. If you spend money that you do not have, it ultimately will get you. And that's where we are, folks. I ran last year on a campaign to do something about the debt, to do something about our spending, because it is a spending problem. You look at revenues over the last few decades in this country, they're pretty much steady. Won't get too technical, but you know what GDP is, and I've been trying to study and understand all this. Well, revenue over the decades has been about 18% of the economy in terms of the value of the revenue, the tax money that comes into the government. It's not the revenue that's changed a bunch. It's the spending. We've stayed pretty steady as a country in terms of the money that we take in. It's the spending that has gotten way, way out of control. Now, I think it's fair to say that it has gotten particularly bad in the last few years, but there's plenty of blame to go around. Both parties, Congress after Congress, president after president, plenty of blame to go around. So what I have said, and I said this a lot last year, is that let's get the blame game behind us. We can just agree that there's plenty of blame to go around. Now let's start fixing it. Because the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking. We can all agree that we need to do something about it. So when I got to D.C., I was honored to be elected in November. And when I got sworn in January, and didn't have a lot of time to sit around and look at the sculptures and everything else, we got to work immediately. And I started digging in to this issue of the debt. Because you hear billions, and you hear trillions, and you hear about deficit, and you hear about debt. A lot of people are wondering, like, okay, deficit, debt, you know, and sometimes it's hard to really, because the numbers are so big, it's hard to understand how it impacts your life. So let me try to tell you what's going on, where we're headed, and what I believe we need to do so that my kids and your kids, and my grandkids and your grandkids grow up in America like the America I grew up in. And I'm proud to say that America was Magnolia. And I'm proud to say this was an incredible place to grow up. We didn't lock the doors when I was growing up here. In fact, I grew up right across the pasture over there on Bel Air, right down from the Sibley's. I know they're here somewhere. Anyway, I love the America that I grew up in. It gave me great opportunity. My mom's a teacher. My dad's a Southern Baptist minister. Didn't grow up with a lot of money, but I had opportunity. Got a good education. This country's been good to me. And I want that kind of country for my kids, for your kids, and your grandkids. What we have now is, you've heard a reference, over a $14 trillion debt. And that is because year after year we are spending in the red. We have deficit spending year after year, and that accumulates as the debt. This has been a long time coming. It's taken a long time to get in this mess. And a lot of people say, well, just cut the waste out. Just cut the foreign aid out. Just get rid of the earmarks. Just do this and you'll fix it. The good news is we're addressing those things. The bad news is you could get rid of them about 50 times and it wouldn't make a dent. Because those things aren't what's driving the debt. The problem is we've had politicians who count on you to get elected, and they've been afraid to tell you the truth. They've been afraid to tell you the truth, because if they tell you the truth, they may not get elected again. Well, I think, based on my campaign last year, and based on what I'm seeing every day when I go around the state of Arkansas, particularly in my district, I think that more and more folks are ready to hear the truth. And whether they're ready or not, I've been telling them. And let me tell you the truth. The truth is that there are some key drivers to our debt. And those drivers are what we call in Washington mandatory spending. What's mandatory? Well, some government spending every year has to be renewed on an annual basis. Okay, defense spending, stuff like that. Mandatory spending is in the law. Doesn't have to be renewed every year. It's automatic. We call it autopilot spending. It's sort of like fixed costs in your home budget. No sense in looking at them, see if you can find some extra money there because they're fixed. So you can just sort of say, that stuff's going to happen. If I'm going to look for savings, I got to look over here. Okay? Well, what makes up that mandatory spending, that autopilot spending? Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, interest on the debt. Those are the biggies. Those are the biggies. Medicare is probably the single biggest problem. It is bankrupt, completely bankrupt in 9 years. Gone in 9 years. Social Security, it's a little further out there, 2037. Got a little time on that one, although we need to deal with it now. Medicaid, same sort of problem. Interest on the debt, can't really do much about that, can we? Except try to reduce the debt. So that's what's driving our debt problem. Okay? Do we need to trim everywhere we can? Absolutely. But we are wasting our time if we don't deal with those. It's like canceling your HBO when you can't afford your house payment. You probably need to do it, but it ain't gonna matter. So, that is the situation that we're facing. I got up to Washington, started looking at this stuff, and you quickly realize that we have been doing this for so long that there's no switch you can turn or law you can just easily pass to fix it. For example, we just voted on a budget Friday, last Friday, that passed the House. I believe it's a great template to get our deficit down to zero, to a balanced budget, and then start paying off the debt. Because obviously, as long as we're still running deficits, we can't pay off the debt because we're still adding to it. The bad news is we can't balance our budget in 10 years, even being really conservative. Really conservative. But what we can do is get on the right path. We can get on the right path. Now, why do I talk about the debt everywhere I go? Talked about it in Morrilton last night at a Lincoln Day dinner. Talked about it in Rogers, in Northwest Arkansas, Saturday night at a Lincoln Day dinner. I do it in my district because I want my constituents to understand how serious it is. And I do it here because I want y'all to understand. If you think it's a 3 on a scale of 1 to 10, and I think it's a 10, then you're not going to understand why I'm so scared. Okay? So I'm running around the house that's on fire saying, hey, the house is on fire. And there are folks sitting on the couch watching TV, and I'm like, hey, get up, the house is on fire. And John, he's on the couch snoring. And I'm like, John, get up, John Boy. The house is on fire. I'm trying to tell people because I sincerely believe, you don't have to take my word for it, this is a Pearl Harbor-like moment for this country. It truly is. There are some historians that were talking to Senator Bozeman the other day, and they said, we believe that in 200 years or so, people will look back on this country's history, and they will look at this time period to see whether we passed the test or failed. Passed the test or failed. Now, I think we can all agree that we've got a problem. The chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, our top military official in Washington, was asked, what's the greatest threat facing this country? He didn't mention Al-Qaeda. He didn't mention terrorism. He said the national debt. The national debt. You can't fight enemies if you can't field an army. You can't afford an army if you're bankrupt. That's what happened to the Soviet Union. They built an army they could never afford. When their economy crashed, they were a powerless country with a big old army and nothing to do with it. Just so you all know, 42 cents of every dollar that the federal government spends, every dollar is borrowed. 42 cents. We pay enough interest to China every week to fund 3 fighter jets and still leave them with $50 million left over. We pay them about $360 million a week in interest, the Chinese. You want to know where your good roads are? We borrow every dollar that is spent after late July. If you were putting it on a calendar, every dollar that's spent after late July is borrowed. Every dollar the federal government spends. That is the magnitude of this problem, folks. And here's the deal. We're paying $200 billion a year in interest on the debt. Now, a lot of people are looking at me going, what's $200 billion? Let me give you an example. The budget for the entire state of Arkansas that y'all work on is about $4.2, $4.3 billion. Okay? So every year, this country pays 50 times the budget of the whole state of Arkansas in interest on the debt. You want to know where your good roads are, your good infrastructure for economic development? You want to know where your investment here is, your investment there is? It's in interest. It's in interest. Flush down the commode. Never going to see it again. And 47%, about half of our debt, is financed overseas. Not all of it, but about half of it. 1970, that was about 5%. Now it's half. Overseas, folks are holding our debt and we're paying them the interest and making them very, very happy. Now the problem with the interest, the bankers are in the room, we got really low interest rates right now. And we're paying $200 billion. When interest rates go back to more of a normal level, we'll be paying $400 billion. That's what we used to pay in interest. For those keeping track, it'd be 100 times the budget of the state of Arkansas. So I think we can all agree it's a problem. Okay, we've established that. Now, how many of y'all remember September 2008 and the financial housing meltdown that we had? I know the bankers remember it. I know anybody, show your hand if you remember. Y'all remember? You know what I'm talking about. The big banks were failing and Wall Street, okay, the market. A lot of this is because people have been getting loans they should have never gotten. Okay, y'all remember that? Now, think back to how big an impact that made on the economy. We're still dealing with it, aren't we, Bruce? Still dealing with it. First of all, I tell folks, Chamber of Commerce and local leaders, mayors, folks at the state level and bankers, businessmen, whatever, I say, you know what? You can do everything right in your community. You can do all the stuff that y'all have done, build industrial park and fund this and fund that, and really recruit business and all that. And it's all going to be for nothing if we have a debt crisis. You ask some of these small town community bankers, you ask them whether they had plenty of reserves in September 2008, whether they had made bad loans, whether they had crossed the T's and dotted the I's and done everything right. And most community banks will tell you, yes, they did. They weren't the problem. Is that fair? They weren't the problem. And then ask them, were you affected by what happened nationally September 2008? They'll tell you big time. They weren't part of the problem. They still got some of the regulations coming their way. They still got impacted economically. They couldn't make the loans that they once could. My point is, this wave will be so big that it will wash away a lot of the good stuff you're doing. Just like September 2008 was so big nationally, rooted in California and Wall Street and everywhere else, impacted everybody. Impacted everybody. So here's what I want you to think about. If you knew that something like September 2008 was coming, you knew it was coming, and you knew it was going to be 10 times bigger, the impact was going to be greater. And you knew what you had to do to avoid it. And you didn't do it. And you just let it come. Wouldn't you say, God, that was irresponsible? Now, if a deer jumps out in the middle of the road and you don't know what's coming, that's one thing. But if you're going 5 miles an hour and a deer's sitting smack in the middle of the road and you see it and it ain't moving and you keep driving and hit it anyway, shame on you for that. Well, that's where we are. That's where we are. Now, here's the good news. After I've thoroughly depressed you, we need to be depressed. Sometimes there ain't no way around the truth, and sometimes the truth is just tough. And it's tough. But here's the good news. This country that we live in has accomplished more, done more, been more creative, created more jobs, had more technological advancement and innovation than any country ever in the history of the world. Period. Not debatable. We are resourceful people. We've been through a lot. This challenge that we have is as big as any challenge we've ever had. So what do we got to do about it? Well, let me tell you what I believe with all of my heart. We have got to deal with the addiction that we have to spending at the federal level. The problem is, and look, this is not popular for a politician to say. I'm in my office in Washington, or I'm in my office in Little Rock, and I got local leaders coming to me. They don't do it as much anymore, but coming to me saying, federal money this, federal money that, federal money this. And look, if there's grant money out there, I'm happy to help people get money that's already allocated. But what I tell them is, this money's going away. What we have created is local communities who are addicted to federal dollars. We send more money up in tax money from our states, and then we beg to get it back. A lot of it we should have never sent up there in the first place. We'd have kept it back home. We'd never need to ask for it back. What do we get for sending it up there? You get a lot of people up there, jobs. Send $1 up there, it comes back as 25 cents. We get all happy because we got it back as a grant. Another 75 cents paying for something in the Washington area. If you visit Washington, you'll see the recession has not been introduced to Washington, D.C. The construction boom is unbelievable. Now, I'm doing my part to counter it by sleeping on my couch every night in an Army sleeping bag. Not because I'm cool, but because it's the right thing, budgetarily speaking, to do. So, let me tell you what we're doing. I ran on this last year. I said, look, this is my key issue. And so that's going to be my focus when I get to Washington. And one of the things that you need to know, it is critical that we deal with the debt if we are ever going to grow jobs. If anybody acts like jobs or tells you that jobs are a different issue, they're wrong. They say, Griffin, what are you doing to create jobs? First thing I say is, we don't create jobs. Private sector creates jobs. We try to create an environment where the private sector can create jobs. But any bill that we introduce to deal with the debt, that's a jobs bill. Because let me tell you something, if we don't deal with this debt, we're going to see unemployment and crisis like you've never seen in your life. So anytime someone's talking about dealing with our spending problem, they're talking about jobs. They're talking about jobs. We passed a budget last Friday, and I know this is a bipartisan audience, and that's why I'm going to say this. If anybody tells you that they can fix this problem without cutting, they're lying. There ain't no way to fix this mess without really tightening the purse strings. We passed a budget on Friday. Some of you have heard of Paul Ryan. We passed a budget in the House. It's going to go to the Senate where it's going to die. But we're going to negotiate with them. Senate's where all good things go to die. Don't you know that? And the president's not going to sign it. So we're going to have to do some negotiating and see what happens. But our budget does this. Our budget saves, notice I didn't say cut, saves $6 trillion over 10 years, gets our budget balanced, not immediately, but moves toward balance and gets there, and pays off the debt. It takes a while, but our budget does that with no tax increases. With no tax increases. Because part of the way we get more tax money is to grow the economy. You start raising taxes, you're going to kill a lot of economic growth. Now here's the great thing about this budget. It addresses Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and it saves them. If you are for the status quo on Medicare, you are for its elimination because it is insolvent in a handful of years. Same with Social Security. So we take those, and we're already hearing the attacks. I was attacked in a radio ad today in my district when we found out they only spent $60 on the ad. Where I joke with Ken Sibley, we know what that'll get you. That'll get you a throat clearing at the beginning of the commercial. But they're basically saying that we want to take away people's Medicare, we want to take away people's Medicaid, we want to take away this, we want to take away that. Let me just say this. First of all, it's a bunch of nonsense. But let me tell you this, what we do. If you are 55 and over, there are 0 changes. 0. I don't mean 55 10 years from now. I mean, if you're 55 this year, there's a certain birthday. This is important because you're going to hear a lot about it. If you are 55 or over, Social Security or Medicare, 0 changes. 0. Why did we do that? Well, we could have balanced the budget faster if we would have said we're going to go ahead and reform them all, no matter where you are in the age bracket. But we knew it would be easier to sell to people who are scared of significant change. If we just said, okay, look, we're not going to change anything that you're used to if you're already on Medicare, Social Security, or if you're getting close to it. We're going to leave that alone, and we can still get the balance on the budget. If you're below 55, we're going to reform them. What we're trying to do with Medicare, for example, is give folks an option like I have, like federal employees have. I don't have a special congressional deal. I have the same that federal employees have. It's a FEHB. And what you do is you choose. And I won't, stand under Blue Cross, or I won't whatever. So you're going to hear a bunch of nonsense. And what I tell you is the misinformation is exactly that. There are going to be some hard choices. We've got to make some changes. But we've got some great solutions to this. So you may not have heard about this much yet, but let me assure you, they're already on the radio in Little Rock, although $60 ain't much. 2012, the election in 2012 is going to be about this. It's going to be about 2 visions of America. And I will close by saying this. There's one vision of an America that is debt-free or moving that way, that has a low tax rate, that does not overly burden people, that lives within its means, which is the right thing to do, that keeps the safety net, but understands that there are limits on what we can spend money on, and doesn't promise people things that the government can't keep. That is one vision of America. That is a strong America. in America that's able to take 200 or 400 billion in interest that we're flushing down the toilet now and use it on things that we need to invest in. Hear the president talk about invest. Well, if we weren't paying all that money to China and elsewhere, we could do some investing. The other vision of America is an America that says we're not going to make the hard choices. We like things as they are. The problem with things as they are, Medicare as we know it, you hear that a lot. Republicans want to get rid of Medicare as we know it. Medicare as we know it is bankrupt. So the other vision of America is a vision where our debt grows. The president's current budget doubles the debt in 5 years, triples it in 10. That's the president's current budget. Does not deal with Medicare or Medicaid or Social Security. So the other vision is more debt, a debt collapse, a debt crisis, and you've been seeing we're not far. We're not far. Who knows when it's going to come, but we're not far. Our credit rating's at risk. We're about to reach our debt ceiling we're going to deal with in a couple months in the Congress. High unemployment, less opportunity, more taxes so you can pay the debt and the interest. And when I'm long gone, my kids will continue to pay for the mess that we left them. That's not the America I want. So I just ask you, I know I'm not your congressman, but when I vote, I'm voting for everybody. I ask you to think about this. This is a deciding point, a decision point in America's history. And we need to decide, which vision of America do you want? Do you want everything you get and never want to back off of it and keep running up the debt? Or do you want to say, we got to make a change? I just ask you to think about that. But remember, the good news is we can fix it. We can fix it. But politicians are only as strong as we are. Thank y'all so much for letting me talk tonight. I appreciate it. I am happy to take any questions that you may have. There are no mics out there, but if anybody has any questions, happy to take them. And they don't have to be related to politics. I lived here a long time. Might be some things you've been wondering about. I'm happy to answer that. Anybody got any questions? My mom doesn't count. Larry? Yes.
I'm in Texas, and my congressman is Dick Interley.
Know him well.
Okay, yeah, that's all I want to know. Y'all running buddies?
We are. He is a great man. He is a sharp guy. He's an Aggie, and I don't hold that against him. But yes, well, there you go. Yes, he is the chairman of what we call the Republican Conference. He is part of the House leadership, and he's asked me to be on a few little working groups, and he's a great guy. You've got a fabulous, fabulous congressman. And I can tell you this, he's got some young kids, and he is positively, absolutely positively committed to dealing with this debt issue, because he feels like I do. I don't want to leave it to Mary Catherine and John. And so, yes, he's a great guy. Come on now. Yes, sir.
Larry Price told me he never believed he'd pay $60 to hear you speak.
You know, Larry, you didn't pay $60 to hear me speak. You paid $60 for that food. I'm just a fringe benefit. You know, I used to work for Larry. Do you know that? How many of y'all used to go to the King Clean down there across from Smitty's? You know, I could start dropping some store names and some of the young folks wouldn't remember, but I remember that dairy bar down there, catty corner from the junior high. Y'all remember that? God, those are good memories. I remember that little quick sack up there that Charles Green had, and it's gone. I guess they built a bunch of condos over there. It's crazy. I don't want any progress. I want it to stay exactly like it was when I was here. Somebody done messed it up. Another question? That was a comment. Yes, sir.
I agree with everything that you just said.
That's the right answer.
My only thing is, I look at it as sharing sacrifice, and I noticed when you said cuts, you didn't include military spending, which I think everything should be on the table. And also, with tax increases, nobody wants to be taxed more. But to get out of this debt, to me, it seems everyone should share. That means programs should be cut. That means entitlements should be maneuvered. And also, I think we might not have a revenue problem, but when you're talking about the riches of the rich, I don't see it being a bad thing to pay more if people that depend on some of these programs have to lose these programs.
Sure.
I'm speaking from a non-partisan. I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. I just study the game, and I think that everything should be on the table.
Sure. Let me say a couple things. First of all, on the military spending, I was one of the ones that led the fight to kill the alternate engine for the F-35. I don't know if you're familiar with the F-35. F-35 is our next generation joint strike fighter. It is a critical piece of equipment. It is a critical jet. It's making the transition from the F-15 and F-16, a lot of those. It is absolutely critical. However, there was a project for the alternate engine. It only has one engine in the plane, but there was a second engine being developed, and leadership wanted that, Boehner wanted that, some others wanted that. I fought that, we got it killed, saved about $3 billion. No one can tell you, whether the Defense Department or any other department in Washington, that there's not places to cut. Now, the problem is when we're involved in two wars and a kinetic military action, which is what the president's spokesman called Libya, I call it military action. But when you're doing that, you can't do anything to put troops in harm's way and cut their equipment. Now, there are places we can cut, and we should cut. But let me say this. This is the problem with looking at this as anything other than a spending problem. A couple things. First of all, if you look at countries around the world who have had debt problems, okay, and have addressed those debt problems. I've got a great chart on this, which I didn't bring tonight. But if you look at those countries, and you've heard of some countries recently, the United Kingdom, Greece, Ireland, okay, you've heard of some of those recently having debt problems. If you look at the countries that historically have had debt problems, and you look at the solution they came up with, did they raise taxes? Did they cut spending? Did they do a combination of the two? If you plot them on a chart, you will see, on this chart that I've got in particular I'm thinking of, you will see all of the ones that were successful in addressing the debt are grouped together. All the ones that were unsuccessful are grouped together in a different part of the graph. And what do they represent? The ones that were successful were the ones that focused on cutting spending. The ones that were unsuccessful tried to tax their way out of it. Why were they unsuccessful raising taxes? To get out of a debt problem. Because people have already demonstrated no discipline. That's why they have a debt problem. When you give them more money, what guarantee do you have that the government's going to pay the debt down with it? You don't have a guarantee. That's like a gambler sitting at a slot machine saying, I don't have a gambling problem, I just don't have enough money. It's crazy. I don't trust the government to use money I give them, extra money I give them, to pay down the debt. That's why we're in this mess in the first place. So if you look at that, you don't even have to guess about it. You can just look at the historical examples and see who's failed and see who's succeeded. The ones that raise taxes fail. The ones that focus on spending cuts succeed. I want to succeed. If you look at the countries that have just dealt with it recently, Greece, Ireland, the UK, they're on that chart that I have. They're not green or red. It's too soon to tell. And I can look where they are, see if they're near the red or near the green. Greece is up near the red. You know what that tells you? Greece is probably going to fail. because their solution was on the wrong side of history. They didn't make the tough choices. Now, to the broader point of having a flatter, fairer tax code, I'm all for that. And that's what our budget does. Our budget does this. Our budget actually, it adopts President Obama's bipartisan debt commission recommendations on some of this. That's the Simpson Bowles, Erskine Bowles, Clinton's chief of staff, Alan Simpson, former senator of Wyoming. That's their commission. And here's what part of what they talked about. They said, reduce the overall rate, where our highest tax rate is 25%, and then shut off a bunch of the exemptions that we get. Because a lot of times, the most wealthy are the only ones who can take advantage of some of those. You will have a flatter, lower, simpler tax code. You know, we also talk about reducing business taxes. Right now, we have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. Why would a company want to do business here when we have the highest corporate tax rate in the world? We scratch our heads going, jobs overseas, jobs overseas. You ever thought to ask yourself, why are they going overseas? It's not just because of cheap labor and all that. We have a 35% corporate tax rate. The average tax rate of the 30 industrialized countries is 25. We need to reduce our corporate tax rate so that people want to stay here. We want business to like us because business is jobs. So a lot of this stuff is dealt with in the budget. Some of it's dealt with separately. You make some good points, and I think we address those points. Any other questions? Jokes? Ridicule? No. Yes, ma'am. I voted for it. Sure. I voted for it because it boiled down to voting for it, and they were smaller cuts than I wanted, much smaller. But if I voted no, that's zero cuts. I mean, I know that people are like, well, it should have been this. You know, look, give me a Senate that agrees with me. Give me a president that agrees with me. And we'll have huge, huge changes. But, you know, and here's the thing I'd say to that. The founders were smart people. They didn't trust government. Founders did not trust government. That's why the founders set up a system where you really can't get anything done unless people all agree. That's the way they wanted it. It's hard to get stuff done. We control 1/2 the House, 1/2 of the Congress, so that's 1/2 of 1/3 of the U.S. government. And I am 1/435 of 1/2 of 1/3 of the U.S. government. And so, look, I know a lot of people were angry about that, and I was just real practical about it. I was like, look, if you vote no on all these continuing resolutions, and by the way, that's funding 2011. That has nothing to do with the budget issue. The budget issue is 2012 and beyond. The reason we were doing this piecemeal funding of the government is because Pelosi didn't pass a budget and appropriations bills last year, so she left us a gift that expired in March, and that's why we had to deal with it. But in any event, so what I tell people is, look, you can vote no on all this stuff and protest it and say it's not big enough, and that's a fair point. Some of my friends did that because they were getting pressure or whatever. I'm not going to question their motives. But I was real practical about it. Vote no, you get zero cuts. Vote yes, you don't get as big cuts as you wanted, but it's bigger than nothing. So, you know, I can't always eat chickadilly, but I'll settle for Kentucky Fried sometimes. Yes, sir.
Japan, with the 4th largest military in the world, we have 9 military bases there, and they want us gone. What's the problem?
Well, it's a little more complicated than that. They don't, I mean, the government of Japan does not want us gone. If the government of Japan wanted us gone, we'd be gone. They have something on their doorstep that they're a little bit scared of, and it's called China. And that's why we're there. We have our fleet, Pacific Fleet over there. And are there people in that country that want us gone? Sure. You know, there are people in this country that think Elvis is still alive. But that doesn't, that doesn't make it the majority view. I think that there are people in Germany that don't want us in Germany, but I think they're the minority. I mean, look, we have been critical to, when's the last time we had a world war in Europe? We've been pretty stabilizing in Europe. Europe has benefited from our presence, and they know it. It's been expensive, but not as expensive as World War. And that's what that's all about. I believe that. Look, I don't think we can go around putting out every fire on earth, but we play a critical role in the world that no one else can play. And it's just a fact.